You're listening to the Modern People Leader podcast, where we go behind the scenes with today's top HR leaders and work experts. We talk to them about how they've gotten to where they're at, what they do every day, and what they see coming next for the future of work. Hope you enjoy. MPL listeners, big announcement before we get into the episode. Because we had so much fun with our inaugural MPL Live event in Austin, we have decided to make MPL Live a recurring event that we do on a quarterly basis. And we've decided that our next in-person event will be in Miami on December 10th. The theme of the event will be the manager dilemma, and we've got another all-star lineup in store. We'll have 3 former MPL guests, Melanie Naranjo, who's the Chief People Officer at Athena. Shout out Melanie, she just got promoted. Dominic Boone, the VP of Talent and Org Development at Liberty Latin America, and Cleo Knowles, the Chief People Officer at SH Hotels. And then we're going to have 2 newbies to the MPL world, so brand new guests to the show. Rosanna Durthy, the VP of Global Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging at LinkedIn, and Jen Fisher, who is the former Chief Wellbeing Officer at Deloitte. It's going to be the exact same format from MPL Live Austin. We got really good feedback. People seemed really happy with the 2 hours of networking that we save after the live podcast. So if you plan on being there, I highly recommend grabbing your tickets now. We really hope that we see you guys there. This could be a fun event to fly in for, or if you are Miami based and you want to bring your entire team, shoot me a DM on LinkedIn. I can offer some group ticket pricing. But yeah, we're really looking forward to this event and hope to see you guys in Miami. Oh, by the way, the link to go register is going to be in the show notes. So just click into the show notes and you can find the link there. All right, now back to the show. Gianna, Brandon, welcome to the Modern People Leader. Thanks for joining on such short notice.
Thanks for having us.
Likewise.
And let's just get right into it. I know we only have you for about 60 minutes, and we start every episode with good news stories like you guys know. And I feel like it's important to take a moment to show gratitude, especially on weeks like this. So with that said, do either of you want to kick us off with good news stories?
Let's see. Well, so I was thinking about this weekend, actually. We're at a place where there's so much destabilization going on around us, things that are going to affect us regardless of our agency in these processes. And I was thinking about how out of chaos and these types of situations, we often find ourselves being really reflective about who we are, our values, what we stand for. And I think that these types of really destabilizing events can almost be this catalyst for allowing us to really engage in deep, meaningful conversations with ourselves, with our family, with our friends. And so, again, that's kind of a roundabout way of gently broaching the topic that we're going to dive further into. But I think there is a good news story element there and a moment of gratitude in the crazy.
That resonates, Gianna. I'll build off of that. The last week in particular, really got me thinking about the importance of wellness as a stabilizer and something that is in certain ways relatively within our influence. And it was timely. I've always aspired to be a morning workout person. I've never been able to pull it off until this summer. And so I just tipped over 100 days in a row of working out in the morning. So we could talk another time about how that finally happened after however many years, but it's been just a really, to your point, Gianna, stabilizing, positive presence, come what may. And that's my good news.
I can definitely feel it the mornings that I don't work out, like today being one of those. I feel like a little bit off. I can go next, Steven. So my good news is that we are going to have our first kid, me and my wife, and we found out the gender on Saturday. Steven, I don't know if Nick and Mateo shared this with
No,
you.
they didn't. This is news to me.
It's going to be a girl. So we're going to have a little girl. And that was I needed that good news at the end of the week. It was just such a long, interesting week. And I guess the thought that I was having, really for the last couple of weeks is that, there are things outside of my control, but something that I can control is teaching this child that I'm bringing into the world kindness, empathy, just like being a good human being. And I'm really, really excited for that. And yeah, like I'm just so excited to have a little one, and I get to join Steven as a girl dad. So that's my good news.
Yes.
Huge congrats.
Huge congrats. Wow, that's hard to top. So I won't. I'll somewhat build off of that and share some of the things that are going on in my life. First of all, Daniel, congratulations as your business partner, as your first cousin once removed. I think that's the official relationship. Like, I couldn't be more excited for you. And for the world, I'm grateful because I think you will be an amazing father. And the things that you just described, I can't think of a better human being to do those things in terms of raising a child to be empathetic, a daughter to view the world in a balanced way. Like, I admire you for your qualities of who you are as a human being. And I think it's going to set you up to be an amazing father. So I can't wait to see all of this. And as a girl dad, like, that's all I know. So I was secretly rooting for girl. So before we all start crying, I will move on to my good news, which is the first thing is I survived we're recording on a Monday for those of you listening. And the weekend past, I survived my 30th high school reunion. First of all, that really dates me. It's weird, still weird, saying 30th high school reunion is something I would go to. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that. But it was fun. I am not a high school reunion kind of guy. And it was really cool. I was able to make an amends with an old roommate who I had left high and dry on a rent deposit when we were college kids and I was a knucklehead. And he was like, you know what? I literally have not thought about, you're thinking about this too much. Like, it's all good. But so it was a cool exercise for me. And so, yeah, so that's my personal good news. My work good news, to keep it on topic for the conversation today, is I had a call earlier. I started my day with a call this morning with our friends at Troop HR and some friends at Charter, the HR research media company. And both Aaron and Tracy are friends of Modern People Leader. We were having a conversation for a client of ours, and we're gonna have an event in Q1. They were talking about how already HR leaders, and this is in the New York community, are already preparing for changes in the administration. And the way that they talked about it, I don't know. I wasn't privy to these conversations, 10, 20 years ago, but I don't know if they were happening, but it did make me feel really, really good that these conversations are happening. And, we know they're happening thank you, Gianna and Brandon, for joining us today. Like, we're having conversations, right? But it's great to hear the broader HR community, HR leaders are talking about it, because as we'll talk about today, I think it's fair to expect for there to be changes. I think a lot of things hopefully will stay the same, but I think there are a good number of things that are going to change for us as HR leaders. And we're going to skip some of the other rituals today. I hope that's okay with y'all, because we really want to get into the meat of the conversation. And so to kick us off, without diving too deep into politics, I want to start with just general thoughts on how the election will impact the workplace I guess in the immediate future is kind of one angle I would like to look at. And then what should we expect going into 2025? So I'll open it up there.
Do you want to go?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off. In the short term, we've been, really trying to extend empathy to our team. This US election was one of the most polarizing ones, I've personally experienced. And so, you have in most any workforce, you're going to have some folks that, actually feel really optimistic and are feeling really immediately positive about the outcome. And you have another fraction of your team, typically, that's not going to feel that way, is going to feel disoriented, concerned, maybe even scared. These are all things we've heard from our team members. And, if you kind of go in with that understanding, it really is helping us figure out how to show up within this. And, I think a couple principles we try to apply is like, one, like you don't have to tell people how they should feel. You just have to understand how people are feeling and the diversity within those reactions, and let folks know that, however they're feeling, like that is okay. We remind folks of some other resources that we have available for folks, whether it's, therapy, professional coaching, time off, conversations that, folks are having within some of our employee resource groups, for example, and just saying, hey, like if, you're feeling a certain way, you're not alone. We've got resources that you can use to unpack that, near term and longer. And we'll move forward together. So I think that's the first thing, is just really starting with our people. It's a really acute moment for some folks, and just normalizing that has been helpful.
I 100% concur with Brandon. And I would even say, if you back up a little bit, pre-election, we knew that going into this cycle was going to be difficult, challenging, and potentially divisive, right? All of the polls, all of the statistics going into this, regardless of what someone believes personally, we could tell that we were a divided country. And so for all of the folks listening, doesn't matter your workforce composition, I guarantee that you have people on either side, meaning one side feeling upset and frustrated, the other side feeling happy and rejoicing at the results. And I think this is a moment for us as leaders in organization to be unifying, to remember and to reinforce the messages that we are humans first and employees second, and to create workspaces where people belong, where people are free to be who they are. And if we go back to DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, that means that we are going to have employee groups who have different lived experiences and therefore have different perspectives on what should and shouldn't happen, in politics. And I think that's okay. The opportunity is for us as leaders to create workplaces that are inclusive, that are safe, and where we can listen and create strategies that are not yes, no, right? Like this isn't a zero sum, you're either here or there. I believe that we can be both and grow the pie.
Gianna, you just made me think of something, about a year and a half ago, with full credit to Maggie Roque, our DEIB leader at Zapier. We had found there's a very specific problem that we found ourselves solving for, and having solved for that about 18 months ago really helped us like get really quick to alignment on how we would show up for the team in this moment. So if I go back a little bit to 18 months ago, we had found that when something would come up, a sociopolitical event of some kind, the team at Zapier, we have folks in 42 countries. So in any given week, there's something of significance going on with at least some fraction of our workforce. We found ourselves feeling fairly reactive. Like something would come up, it would bubble up, and they were like, ooh, what do we do? Should like the company say something? Is there like a statement, a response, like, and so on? We usually felt pretty quickly aligned to like support, like what kind of supports can we extend or connect folks to? That was pretty good. But it was this like, what does the company have to say about this? That really, I think, tripped us up and left us feeling pretty reactive. Under Maggie's leadership, what we ended up doing about 18 months ago is we created what we call our sociopolitical response approach. And effectively what it says is that, unless something happens in the world that like very acutely interferes with our ability to deliver for customers, the company will not speak on it. So we won't publish statements about events that are going on in the world. It's like, leaders within the company, anyone can talk about it. So what this doesn't say is that folks cannot talk about things of significance, to them or to their peers, like within the organization. So it's not a bar on like sociopolitical related speech at all. It just says that like the company doesn't really have a voice. It's not directly tied to our mission, what we wake up doing every day. And so that's not part of how we're going to think about response. When we do think about it is a little bit more, Gianna, but you and I were talking about a moment ago, which is, well, how can we show up for our people? Mm-hmm. Now, there were a couple of principles within this that Maggie laid out at the time. I didn't fully appreciate how helpful they would be until moments like last week's election. The principle behind it, because by the way, that approach of like the company not making statements, that was like, not everyone liked that. So much like I want to work at a company where when something like this happens, I'm going to hear from my board or I'm going to hear from my executive team, like on paper, or maybe you'll publish it externally even.
Well, and Brandon, just to interject here, because I want to get back to the principles of the aspects that have been super useful this week. But going back to like making that decision, what did that brain trust look like? Like I've got to imagine there are companies out there that are in response or reaction mode rather than having proactively thought about having this kind of committee in place. And so for those that are still struggling with this, like for example, the day before the election, I posted what I thought would be some helpful things. And, I was just interested to hear in the comments, there was one voice that said, well, this isn't extracurricular activity. This is work. Like we shouldn't be talking about these things at work. I agree with you. It feels like it depends, right? It depends on what your mission is. It depends on like the culture and how the company has existed in the past. But I've got to imagine that there are still companies figuring this out. And so I love that you guys figured out what works for Zapier. But how can you tell us a little bit more about how that came about?
There were a couple of things we were hearing from the team that were like sources of inspiration. One reminder as we talked with folks in developing this approach is that for many of these types of like sociopolitical events, they can represent like deeply concerning developments for some team members, but not for others. Right. So it's a little bit of like, but another one like associated with that too is when we talk to folks, is like some folks will tell us, hey, to your point, Stephen, it's like, hey, I have an expectation where if I come to work and something like this is going on in the world, that we're going to talk about it. For every person from whom we heard that, we talked to another person who said, work is my oasis from this. I have to deal with this stuff at home, in my community, with my family, with my friends. Like I come to work, in my hope and expectations, this is an oasis, this is a place where I don't have to be confronted with these topics, where I can take a break from them. And it was just a reminder that, like Gianna, you talked about, like folks not only have different perspectives, they also are impacted differently and have different expectations about what they need at work in relation to those events.
And
yeah,
I was just going to add to that, Brandon. I agree with you. I also think we as leaders in workplaces should have options available to employees so we're not forcing people to engage in conversations that may not speak to them. But I do think that it is our responsibility to care for those in our charge, and so that could look like making sure we have resources available, having therapists or other EAP solutions that employees at their own choice can opt into if they want to be able to express how they feel. I mean, feelings are messy. And I think what I'm observing is also that there's a generational difference in terms of needs and expectations. And so what I mean specifically about that is if we look to Gen Z, there are a number of Gen Zers who are expecting and wanting and needing spaces in their work communities to express themselves and to feel a sense of alignment. And I think that's different from some of the other folks in the workplace, people who are more tenured. And so I don't think there's an absolute right or wrong in my personal opinion. I do think that we as leaders, though, need to have resources and options available for people to opt into if they would like.
Yeah, it really is a good reflection of what we heard from the team when we shipped this approach, Gianna. Because what we heard from folks is like, hey, like whether this approach meets my expectations for like company voice, in some of these events, what is ultimately helpful is like people. I think a lot of our teammates understand like the company ideally is like picking a lane, right, and that's inevitably going to meet and not meet some folks' expectations. What we heard from the team is like, hey, what is helpful? Like, given that reality, is it's really helpful when you're clear about what should I expect from my organization. And then two, it's really helpful when you are consistent. So like when that next thing comes up, you apply like whatever you put on paper, that's what I can expect from you. And that is a form of trust building that I hadn't fully appreciated when we first shipped that as we started applying it to different situations, we would hear from folks. And again, I think to your point, Gianna, not only is it not the no one size fits all, there's no perfect approach for every organization, but it doesn't, what we just described here for Zapier doesn't necessarily meet the expectations of all of our team members, because no approach can, but the clarity and the consistency is what we're hearing is helpful.
Okay.
So Brandon, for like this last week, the election was last Tuesday. The results came in late Tuesday night. So on Wednesday, everybody was processing. Can you use that specific example and share how you put it through this socio-political response approach? Like what the last
You
like
bet.
4 or 5 days have looked like?
Yeah. Well, Gianna, you said it best, is that we could see from a mile away that this election, no matter what the results were, we're going to be polarizing and have a impact on, some portion of our work community. And so 3 weeks ago, the first thing we did is we sent a note to all of our managers, just naming it. It's a very global team. I think most folks were probably aware the election was coming up at some point, but I would also bet that most folks didn't know how quickly it was or what the date was. They're like, US election, here's what's, roughly speaking on the ballot. Here's the date, we're 3 weeks away. Fact. Two, it's a pretty divisive environment right now. This will have impacts for some portion of your team, as a leader. Three, reminder, here's what to expect or not to expect from Zapier, like the corporate entity, like the company. Like, we're not going to make us, no matter what the results are, we're not going to make a blanket statement, nor will we require any form of conversation or engagement with the topic inside the company. But reminder, here are the things that are absolutely okay. Like, if folks want to engage in conversations about this in an opt-in basis, to your point around choices, Gianna, they can do that. ERG leaders are aware, and they're having their own preparations around this to support our communities. And three, like you were saying, all these different therapy and wellness related resources, and it's just a reminder of here's exactly how to pull those down if that's what's helpful for you as a leader, because as a manager, you're a person too, right? But also depending on what you hear from your team. And that was step number one. And then we did a similar enablement with our ERGs and ERG leaders. So, but yeah, Gianna, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, we took the stance of not choosing a specific political stance, and instead making sure that we have our ERGs and our EAP, like Employee Assistance Program resources available. And then the day after, there was leaders across the organization allowed for space, right? Because that was a day I like to describe as a very delicate day, right? Just emotions were high. Many of us were feeling all the feels. And so, that was a day of, in some ways, it was a unifying experience to be able to go through just a very emotional and raw experience together, again, regardless of someone's political, standing. And I want to take the conversation and start looking forward, because I feel like we as leaders in organizations need to start thinking about, okay, we are where we are now. And it sounds like, I'm guessing many of us, Brandon, are doing what you and I, have talked about and done with our, different internal elements. But Stephen, to your question earlier, I do think we also need to start thinking about, okay, what does this mean in practice as we look to January of next year and beyond? Because there are some real implications for us as business leaders. And I think that's worthy of starting that conversation.
And I want to get to that. Before we do, I narrow the conversation to not the impact to our employees, well, to the company, to our employees, but to HR leaders specifically. And one of the interesting things that came up on the conversation earlier is that there's likely, and again, this is Wertonomics, so this is not rooted in actual data, any sort of poll data, but it is not outside the realm of possibilities that a majority of CEOs are bullish on the outcome. And that may differ dramatically with the position of CHROs or HR leaders being people oriented, being people focused. And again, I'm not trying to take this into this side or that side, but just highlight that there is a realm of possibilities where me as a HR leader, chief people officer, am now having to navigate this scenario where I personally some of the things that I built my career on, the people first kind of mentality. It feels like I may have to unwind some of that thing, just of what got me here may not get me to the next set of goals that I have in my career or for the company. And so I don't know if I'm just if this is just in my head or if this is real life, but what do you have to share with other chief people officers out there that may be struggling with a dynamic like that, or maybe a totally different dynamic?
I have thoughts. Do you want to go first, Brandon, or do you want me to?
You should lead off.
Thank you. Very generous and giving of you. So, Stephen, what comes to mind as I hear you say that is this is an example, a commitment to DEIB, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is sort of the example that comes to mind. Meaning, I wonder if down the road the progress that we've made in terms of becoming more diverse, inclusive in our work practices, I wonder if that will be deprioritized in light of all of the different things. Will visas be harder to get for some of our non-American workers? So I think about all of these things. A dynamic that you touched upon that I'd like to clarify is I don't think that we have to unlearn the way that we have worked in the past and what has made us successful in the past. I think that we can build upon that. Yes, evolution is the future. We have to be able to take what has made us successful and great and inclusive as an organization and perhaps apply and evolve that differently. But to be clear, I don't think we're going to be living in a world where all is lost and many of the platforms and foundations that CPOs and CHROs hold dear will be out the window. I do not believe that. I believe that there is a way to weave and have both and. So this could be going back to home base and some of the things that have worked historically, looking at data as an example, going to our CEOs and our executive teams. And as we use the example of DEIB, as we make the case for continued DEIB, making sure that we're being objective as we talk about these things. So relying less on emotion, which can be very divisive, and instead coming at this from a place of listening, seeking to understand, and finding solutions and giving leaders options. So I think that these are the moments that try us as leaders. Being a leader when everything is easy is easy. Being a leader when things are tough and they're divisive and they're scary and they're unknown, that is the true measure and character of a real leader. And so I think this is time for us to dig deep and to go through a reflective process and ask ourselves, what is it that helped us get to where we are? Let's take elements of that. Let's now look at the machine, make some modifications, and then prepare for the future.
I'm just going to sprinkle on top of that because you said it best, Gianna. I think part of what I'm hearing from you is people and HR leaders like us, this is not our first rodeo. The contours of what we're talking about, like post-election, some of that might feel fresh, or maybe we haven't had to navigate that particular dynamic in a minute. That overall muscle that we've been building for so many years, not just us, but our organizations of, seeing a change in the external environment, figuring out what might that mean for us, scenario planning, revisiting first principles, right? To your point, these are tests of leadership. They're tests of personal values. They're tests of organizational values. And, organizations that rise to the occasion, like you're describing, Gianna, they've got a real play to come out stronger and more on the same page than they were before.
Yep. And we as people leaders, think about the last 5 years. We've been through hard stuff. Unfathomable events over the last 5 years. And we've had to dig deep into our resiliency, into, Brandon, what you call the scenario planning and thinking outside of the box while holding true to first principles and our values. So yes, I do think the future will challenge us. But I think about Brene Brown recently posted, and she talked about microdosing hope. That rang true for me because in moments like this, let's not turn to despair. Let's take a moment to feel very human emotions, and let's also microdose hope. In fact, give me a double dose of hope.
And so
That's
on
awesome.
that note, microdosing hope kind of throws me back to one of my group chats that I have with 15 of my closest friends. And this was probably Wednesday or Thursday. We were discussing the results of the election, and many of my friends were disappointed with the results, and they were asking for, reasons to be hopeful. And one of my friends came in and he had 4 or 5 bullet points of he's like, while we may go backwards in these 2 or 3 areas, there is like some hope. And he had a few bullet points that he listed out. And I'm curious, like when you think about the next 2 or 3 years, and you think about just like work as a whole or HR, like where can we microdose hope? Like where do you see more hope than before if we're trying to, find some positives for the people that are looking for some positives right now?
Yeah. Gosh, I would say that if I think about some of the specific, concerns that we've been working through, think about, you talked about kind of visas and immigration, Gianna, we've talked about DEIB, as you also mentioned, and what have you. And, it's interesting, like there's like something to pay attention to, and in some cases, something to be concerned about, depending on, the type of business that we're running within each of those areas. In addition to the fact that it's also uncertain. That's the other thing we've been talking about too, is like, you can say like, well, maybe, the new administration will try to like roll back or put more constraints on DEI work that can happen within organizations, or not, right? The visa stuff or not. Like it's all very much up in the air. And so there's a little bit of like, we want to anticipate, we want a scenario plan, but there's also only so much we can do until we see kind of the actual, decisions of the administration. And so within all of that, it's the hope, I think, is that, even if we get specific and say, okay, let's say there are more even like federal constraints on what DEI can look like within organizations, that's a pressure test. Does our organization really understand where the rubber hits the road with DEI? Like, what does that mean to us, practically speaking? And I would say, I was talking with some of our, people leaders on this topic just a couple of days ago. It's like, this doesn't change a thing for us. Like, even if some of that stuff comes down the pike, like legislatively or otherwise, like we have a durable understanding of why this matters for our organization. We can stand by the way it shows up in our practices. And so I would expect, we are anticipating even some actual changes in the law or in policy, but also just a bunch of debate and challenge within that area over the next couple of years. And we want to keep the conversation open about that. But I think it was, really helpful for our team just to hear from, some of our most senior leaders, like, this does not change a thing for us. It may change some of the packaging over time. We'll, of course, be compliant with whatever laws come down the pike. But big picture, it's hard to think of something that could develop over the next couple of years that would throw us off our game, because the team, credit to the team, with all over the organization, like we've done a lot of work the last few years to like really put in our own words like what DEI means to us practically, and we're going to stay the course.
Yeah, when I think about the future and what gives me hope, so I agree with what Brandon is saying. I also think about how, let's just acknowledge this is hard. We're going through a hard time. And regardless of someone's personal beliefs, we have a united and shared experience of this being a hard time. And so, what makes me hopeful is I believe that is an opportunity for us to practice empathy and communication. Because again, regardless of what someone believes, we're in this together, and we know that there are differences. And so we as leaders have this unique opportunity to lean into our humanity, to lean into the vulnerability of saying we don't have all of the answers, and to open up channels of communication and actively listening. A lot of what has gotten us here, I think, is because we've not truly listened with the intention of understanding. Sometimes people listen with the intention of then responding and, getting their own point out. This is an opportunity for us as leaders to truly go back to some of the basics, and that is to listen to what our employees need, and to activate and to lean into data and information.
One thing that, and it's interesting, Gianna, that you brought up Brene Brown, and I love that microdosing hope quote, because I'm gonna steal that. We're gonna keep using, because sign me up. But one of the things that Brene Brown said in our podcast with her was every day is a leg day. And, that's kind of what I'm hearing from Brandon, is that like or both of you, we've been doing this. Like we've had to work through hard things. This isn't new. This isn't our first rodeo. And if it is, those individuals are surrounded by other people that are experienced and have community, which is great. And so I think that brings me a lot of hope, knowing that this is a muscle that we've had to flex, and we can't forget that. And when I start to look to the future, we don't have to throw everything. We don't have to throw the baby with the bathwater, or whatever that saying is. Like, we've done a lot of good work, and just because some things may change or likely to change, it doesn't mean that we have to assume that everything has to go. Because if we've done our work right, and I HR people are particularly thoughtful and intentional and rigorous, and so a lot of these programs are going to have legs, and they will prove the test of time. Maybe not at all organizations. And I think that is something that I just wanted to repeat, if if I heard you correctly, because I think we all need to take that in, and I think we all need to kind of acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm. And I think
Mhm.
Brandon said it well when he talked about how working with leaders to say, all of these things politically might be moving and swirling about us, but let's go back to our values. We still believe in inclusion, like we still believe in these things. And so, how that manifests itself in our work daily may shift and evolve, but we are still united in those things that have made us strong in the past. I think that I agree wholeheartedly.
So me and Steven, we met up on Wednesday, for our weekly meeting to talk about MPL Live. And that weekly meeting just turned into like 2 hours of not talking about MPL Live and talking about all of the other things. And one thing that we landed on was like, what more can we be doing as the modern people leader to support HR right now? Is there anything we're not doing to help move the profession forward? And I just want to ask you guys, like, is there anything else that you think we should be thinking about? Like, think this is a good first step, like having these conversations. I think oftentimes we don't have like an official, what did you call it, Brandon, socio-political response approach. And we're like, question one, should we, should we be responding on all of these things? And yeah, I'm just gonna stop talking. Like, any thoughts there?
One thing I appreciate about the MPL platform that you're building, if I think about like the brand or what you all do, that feels pretty distinctive to me in the space of kind of HR leader community and what have you. There's a lot of nuance and real talk in the spaces that you make possible, right? Starting with these casts, right? So the reason I think that's helpful is that there are no shortage of places you can go to get like benchmarks. There are places you can go to get intel on policies that might be coming down the pike or trends in HR. It's great. And that stuff's really useful. I come to MPL when I'm looking for like a particularly candid and nuanced conversation about like how, I mean, you actually gave like a microcosm of this. You're saying like, as MPL, like what should our approach be to sociopolitical response? And you know what the interesting thing is? I don't know the answer to that question, right? It's a nuanced question. They'll probably have a nuanced answer that's very specific. And there are so many things that we navigate as people leaders with our organizations where the answer to XYZ question has to be somewhat bespoke to our organization. And what you all should just keep doing is keep making space to bring leaders in where you can be in conversation. Because what a lot of us are looking for is kind of intel on how can I make a high quality decision in my organization's context? What principles should I be thinking about? They're kind of different case studies of like this leader went this way on that topic and this leader went that way. They're both amazing, thoughtful people. How could they have taken two completely different approaches? Like this is a place I've come to get information about like, how do you know, which way to go, and in a very real talk kind of way.
Plus one to that, I appreciate so much how Daniel and Stephen, you have created this NPL community of really thoughtful people leaders who can come together, share best practices, and feel in community. So much of what we do can feel very isolating. It can be very lonely in the roles that we have. And so to have this sacred space where we can come and meet with others who are experiencing and going through similar types of challenges and almost in a think tank like environment have ideas. I think Brandon's very, very right in that when we talk about these things, there's not an absolute right or wrong, right? And so creating space for the conversation and the knowledge sharing, but then also what I love about that is we're able to listen, to listen hard, and then take back with us our own bespoke solutions that are going to work for us and our organizations. And you do that through, yes, through the podcast, through the, the in-person gatherings, which I hope you're going to do more of, even after Miami, by the way. But I think like that's like, this is what we need.
A couple of things that come up for me in this conversation. I think about the burnout that so many in our profession are suffering from, continue to suffer from, the implications that has on what future leadership within human resources looks like. And, on one hand, that's like super, super concerning. But on the knowing what I know there's never been more work being done to try to find an answer to this problem. And there's never been more communities, great communities out there that are filling that. And so, of course, we can amplify these communities. We can do podcast swaps with various resource providers to HR leaders. But another thing that excites me when I flip that, how can we think about this in a positive way, is I do think that this is a time to enroll the next wave of HR leaders, whether it's new to career people or it is people in career that are questioning, well, do I just keep doing that? Do I keep going down this track or do I pursue some other track? I feel like the time is now. We've got to enroll because of my prior statement. And I'm curious, like, any thoughts that you have on how we do that, or just like, how can we begin to attract, whatever the next wave, this will evolve. I do believe that. I forget who said that earlier. Like, things are just going to, we're going to be presented with a new wave of challenges and we're going to figure it out. We're going to work together. We're going to find solutions, and it's probably going to look different though. And so when we think about like who are the next wave of leaders we want to be part of this journey and part of this kind of, I guess, mission, how can we better tap into that? What does that bring up for you, I guess, is what I'll ask.
Yeah. Personally, I love to see the tent get bigger. I don't know if you're noticing this, Gianna, and maybe it's just a little bit on the edges right now, but I personally observe more diversity of background for folks coming into the work that you and I are doing. And I really hope that continues. I don't know if I fully understand why that's happening, but I'm really glad it is.
Yeah.
Right. Like we just like learn more from each other that way, just like fresh perspectives and what have you. And again, I think we're better for it. So I don't know, whatever, if you all have a point of view on what's juicing that trend, I think we should, keep at it, because I think we're richer for it. In addition to the fact that, like, I just think we're going to need more pipelines, even from a volume perspective, because of the high churn of veterans and jobs like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I concur. I think it is super exciting that there are people entering the HR profession who are not your typical HR background. So people who are more like business, leaders or business individuals, people who are from the arts, or like from all of these different perspectives, which I absolutely love. An idea, Stephen, and Daniel, is I'm part of a couple different CHRO and CPO circles. And one of the things that one of them has done recently is when we have gatherings, we were tasked with bringing a next level leader to this. And sometimes they're virtual, sometimes they're in person. So to the point of developing and bringing that next wave of HR people leader forward, what's been really nice is that in doing so, there's knowledge sharing, but then also there's that community creation element for all of this next generation of leaders who are coming together, sharing ideas and having some similar experiences. Often there are number twos, but they will be the future. And I think that we have a responsibility of making sure we're bringing them with us, because the future is going to require some new skills and some different ways of thinking.
That's a great idea. And I think early on, me and Steven had brainstormed like 5 different formats that we could do. And one of them was, I think we called it like next gen HR. And the idea was to reach back out to all of our former guests and ask for recommendations. Like, who's the one person on your team that's like the next generation of HR, and make that like a recurring monthly episode that we do. So thanks for reminding us. I think we should definitely do that. Any other thoughts? We're getting close to the end of the conversation. Any final thoughts that you want to leave our audience with?
I think only that I'm glad that you kind of seized the opportunity to get in conversation with a couple folks who care about what you're building and care about helping guide organizations through, challenging and sometimes unexpected things. Like Gianna said best, like we know how to do this, but it's also okay to recognize the challenge within it, the humanity within it. I think that it's really helpful. I think it's also a good mantra, even for maybe for us personally, in the weeks ahead. I needed to hear that.
Yeah. I guess in closing, I would say thank you for, as Brandon mentioned, moving quickly and creating this conversation. So immense gratitude. And secondly, what I would say is to all of the people leaders who are listening and who are tuning in, to know that you're not alone. We are in this together, and we can do hard things because we have each other. And although sometimes it's hard to recognize this when you're in it, there's that saying that the darkest part of the night is right before dawn. And dawn will break, dawn will come. And I'm grateful that we have each other.
Oh my God. That's a perfect way, I think, to wrap this conversation. I'm grateful that we have you all to join us on an Odd Monday to talk about this. So thank you. I'm leaving this conversation with more optimism than, to be totally candid and frank. It's been a tough week for me. And we've been in a lot of conversations, and this is a good reset. I think this is a good recalibration, and I learned some tools from this conversation that I think that I will take with me, that I can share with others, and I think that our audience and listeners will get a lot out of. So thank you.
I will be microdosing hope every day. So
20 seconds.
Yeah, maybe that can be our collective one phrase close, like microdose hope.
Yes.
Love it.
Well, thanks so much. This has been a lot of fun. It's always fun with you two. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good week. Bye. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Modern People Leader. We really, really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed the show, please leave us a 5-star rating. It would mean the world to us. And connect with us on LinkedIn. We want to know what you think about the show, and you can find links to both of our profiles in the show notes. Thanks again for listening, and see you on the next episode.